have taught 4 periods and you will have taught 50 unique students. And then you have an elective for another 25 students, of whom perhaps half are in your other courses, and you will have taught your required 5 courses, and you will have a total student load of 62. And the correlation between that measure and gains in student performance over a 2-year period is immense.
The implications of what Peter McWalters said and what Bill Ouchi said obviously, to some degree, come to rest at the preparation programs. So, Bob, if you want to respond to kind of those 2 dimensions.
Yeah. First, obviously, to make decentralization, as Bill was describing it, work, you have to make, it requires a very significant investment in the preparation and selection and support of principals. Something that obviously has a thread that has run through much of this conversation. But it also requires obviously really smart, intelligent leadership at the district level. And I think if you read Bill's chapters on New York, you'll see the kind of careful, strategic way in which Joel Klein and his leadership team moved over time to actually implement this degree of school-level autonomy. But I just wanted to come back and reinforce one point before coming back to the preparation question, and that is that I think we have a lot of evidence from the charter movement that simply thinking that schools on their own, without support systems, are going to be able to figure out how best to take advantage of their autonomy is a mixed blessing. It depends hugely on the quality of leadership. The charter management organizations at their best, I think, have really figured out what it is that school districts at their best do, and have managed to provide the kind of direction, support, leadership development that has enabled these schools both to have the kind of flexibility at the individual level that Bill was describing, but also to do that in the context of a reasonably robust support system. So for me, this does come back again to this question of what's the right balance. In terms of leadership preparation, I think Joel made the point again this morning that somehow we've got to figure out a way to actually engage universities and school districts in a more effective collaborative strategy. The program I was just describing that we're about to launch does that through this intensive residency year experience. But I think effective programs around the country are understanding that there's got to be a really strong clinical component, that there has to be buy-in from the host district, or if it's a charter management organization, the host school or schools, if this preparation program is going to work. We have to break out from the kind of assembly line model when it comes to the preparation of leaders and thinking that there's one piece of this that universities do alone and they kind of turn them over to schools. One of my biases when it comes to teacher development, and I think the principle holds for the development of principals as well, is that districts are going to have to make more investments than they have currently made in providing stronger induction and support for people beginning in these roles, whether it's teacher level or principal level. And smart districts are learning to do that, just as they're learning to invest in building their own pipelines.
That's great. And Arlene, you've got a project program in Philly, Imagine 2014, which I realize is quite broad, but to the extent that you want to talk specifically, or would talk specifically about the role of education leadership in it, and whether you think you have the leaders on the ground now to get you where you want to go.
Well, I gave everybody the 21-23 year, okay? So I'm always interested in what's coming, but right now me and all of us in Philadelphia are treading water here and trying to make it work now. So we have this sense of urgency that we have to get it done. We have to get it done quickly while everybody else is trying to figure out how to do it. I actually think that, again, we spend so much time, whether it's Joel and Michelle or it's me and Carol, we just need to get this done for our kids. And I know that, I mean, there are some autonomies that come with New York and that come with Philadelphia that the majority of school districts don't have. We live in a very politicized world, but we have this sense of urgency of thousands and millions of young people who are behind. And unless we can get them to a state of proficiency, they're going to suffer. So are their communities, and so is this country. So,
Arlene, what's the specific levers for ed leadership in the plan?
well, I think that in our plan, again, we've looked at leadership at every level. And at the district level, we have looked at how we can do actually 4 things. How we can increase achievement for all children, how we can look at these issues of equity and how we allocate all resources, and then how we hold adults accountable. We have, like probably most school systems, a real issue with a weak bench for principalships. And I cannot stress the importance of instruction, knowing the instructional core. I don't know how we get young people to a state of proficiency unless principals can help teachers with the instructional core. And we don't have in Philadelphia that core, and so we're trying to build that new core with, we have 95 universities and colleges in Philadelphia. We've put an RFP out. We want to design the new programs so that the people coming to work in Philadelphia understand what they're coming into and how they need to lead, and how they need to be instructional leaders, as well as managers of complex organizations that we call schools.
Right.
So.
I'm gonna ask a final question, and I'm gonna ask each of the panelists to answer it, and then we're gonna open it up. So you guys think about what you want to ask and to whom. This morning, a question was asked, Andy Calkins, who I see over there, about innovation and the innovation agenda. And we have a couple of federal levers, a couple of federal opportunities right now, including money that's on the table, whether through Race to the Top, the Innovation Fund, broadband kind of money. So there's that. And then there's ESEA reauthorization. So each one of you, to the extent that you would say what your proposal is to think big and innovate, since we seem to, I'm maybe showing my bias, we have an opportunity here to not just be so incremental in thinking about how we advance the cause of improving schools. What would you say to, and I guess I'm framing it in terms of the federal policymakers sitting in front of you. We've got opportunities. I set this whole panel up by talking about a moment in time, and I think there's nobody in this room who doesn't agree that the stars have aligned in a way we've never seen. And there's a robust conversation going on now about we have an opportunity to do more than just make very incremental progress, but we have an opportunity to really jumpstart something here through what's being called something innovative, the innovation agenda. I mean, if you could tell the federal policymakers, either through applications for money that are happening right now, because only those that are truly innovative are going to get money. You're not going to be able to just plug holes and move forward. But I would say even more important perhaps is ESEA reauthorization and Title II in the Higher Education Act and Title II in ESEA, where there are teacher and human capital kinds of issues that can be addressed. I hope I talked long enough to give you all time to think about what you tell the policymaker about how we jumpstart this school improvement agenda, but with ed leadership being your prism. All right, who's ready? Okay, Bill.
Well, I think first of all, the most important thing is to make sure that the public is better informed about the way their schools and school districts are run. And I think the dimension on which we are lacking is people need to know what the administrative ratio is by school. They need to know what % of the money in a district actually makes it to the classroom. And there is on the IES website, it has been for the last several years, a recommended cost accounting framework, which the government has not felt it had the power to impose upon the states. And I think that's a good reluctance for them to have. But the states are committing large-scale deceit in the way they now obscure those facts. And I think that the federal agencies have at their disposal a sufficient array of powers through which they could make it evident to the public what those two ratios or facts are.
That's helpful. Peter?
I don't have any trouble with that. I would argue that, no, I don't. I mean, for some of us, trying to get from a budget plan to an accounting infrastructure is a battle. And I don't know who the block is, whether it's the feds, the state, or the local. But the technology and the systems and the coding structures are there now. So I should be able to go in, and not for the purposes yet of accountability, but just to track the fact that I thought we were investing in a reading program in the 3rd grade, and when I look at the actual expenditure pattern, it never got to the 3rd grade and it wasn't about reading. Those are very real barriers. And that infrastructure is coming to us, and we need to grab them. But in terms of the bigger piece, we're coming out of a system we all just agreed brought us disaggregation and gaps, and a demand for information and a demand for response, and the all kids piece. Thank God, that's exactly where we want to be. Now from then on, it's either you've been hiding for 30 years, or you don't at scale know how to do this. We still have little pockets of excellence and little streams of good practice, whether they're dramatic or incremental, but we do not know how to do this at scale yet. And to search for the scale answers is a search for management, information systems, but it's also a search at the core of this, after this 2 or 3 days, teacher and leadership capabilities. Your image of whether I fix the ratio or not, when I have at least had the moment of putting together interdisciplinary teams, and I've had good teachers stumble. They don't know how to use the time. They don't know some of the strategies to close some of the gaps. This idea that somehow we can just turn it loose with the right incentive system is going to happen. No, I'm sorry. We have got to start supporting our teachers in their transparent search for best practice, and that's got to come out, open the door, make it public, make it a little bit less defensive, and let me find those practices that are either in the research, or they're with the teacher down the hall, or they're at least in the industry. We've got to start pushing that. And the catchphrase for me on that is, after all these years, we do not have teachers who own assessment. They do not know how to use their reading of their students' work as either a diagnostic instrumentation or as a benchmark of how far those kids are from the standard. And again, these are systems that exist out there, but it means spending a lot more time with teachers together, creating the lesson, creating the rubrics, looking at student work, anchoring that against standards, either in the state system or however you pick the standards. And that's why I would argue that in most of these smaller, either private or good public schools, all the decentralization is aimed at a very clear terminal point, as in what is good enough to go to college. We haven't got that. That isn't articulated well enough for me. And I do think this investment opportunity is fine, but this is my caution. The states really are crashing. And we keep hearing, let's not pass over this opportunity, and we all agree with that. But when you say state then, please remember legislator, governor, state board, state agency, labor, school committee, town council, and mayor, whether it's Fenty and Michelle or whatever. When you pull this off, the opportunities to break through what I'll call convention, I don't think there's very many districts who can break through the current impasses in local contracts without a state lever. The state's got to play in that game. And if that means state agencies around regulation or state law being approached through the legislature, we've got to have many, many more levers at play if you're going to turn this very rapidly moving opportunity for investment strategies to give somebody like Arlene a chance to get over certain humps and put money and/or consequences or incentives where they need to be.
Bob, do you think we're at a point in time that we haven't seen before to make improvements in all these levers, but today, we're talking about ed leadership today?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, for me, the name of the game is human capital. It's attracting the right people to come into this field and to stay in this field long enough to really make a difference, whether it's at the classroom level, the school level, or the system level. My colleague, Dick Elmore, likes to say that the problem with education is not that we're resistant to change, is that we're too promiscuous about change. So I always recoil a bit about, the problem is we haven't had enough innovation. In my view, the problem is we've really got to pick a course and stay with it long enough to really see some results. I think, to me, one of the things that's hugely encouraging about this period is that what Teach for America, the New Teacher Project, and New Leaders for New Schools have shown us that we really can attract a much larger fraction of the talent pool than we have historically been able to. I shouldn't say historically, because obviously way back when, particularly when there weren't other options for women and folks of color, education got a very significant share of the talent pool. Now that there are many more opportunities in other fields, we have really, in my view, kind of lost ground, and we need to figure out a strategy to create the conditions under which really good people are going to want to come into this field and stay in this field and provide leadership. And I'm hoping that as people think about particularly Title II of ESEA and other federal levers, that they'll be thinking hard about this particular piece of the challenge. I mean, I do have to say, sitting here, that the Wallace Foundation a decade ago made, I think, a really smart strategic decision, which said that the single most important leverage point for a foundation with relatively modest resources, modest against the $500 billion enterprise, is to focus on leadership and really try to figure out what the levers are at the state level and the district level, and what the strategies are that might actually enable states and districts to develop more conscious, explicit strategies around leadership development, leadership preparation, leadership support. Our university has been a beneficiary from two earlier investments that the foundation has made in this leadership field. I do think that there's much more that the feds could do to create incentives for not only for universities, but for this increasing array of other organizations that want to step up and try to figure out how do we attract, prepare, support, develop the kind of leaders that this system needs.
Arlene, what would help at the district level, given what, these opportunities on the table
Well,
now?
I think my colleagues on the panel have mentioned everything that I would mention to the federal government. One, I think we do need a federal campaign of some sort about how to recruit the best and the brightest. The truth is, and I'm not teacher bashing, but the bottom third come into teaching now. That wasn't true 30 years ago because there were limited opportunities. Philadelphia has more than 78% of our children are children of color, but our teaching staff is less than 28%. We've got to go after race does matter. And we're going to have to do something about that now. Some kind of national campaign that actually starts, I believe, in high school and helps young people with scholarships, loan forgiveness, so that they can come into these large urban school systems where they're needed on many levels, not only for the students, but for their colleagues. I also believe and agree that I would like the federal government to continue to put the pressure on. I love that they've placed pressure on this sense of urgency, and I want them to continue with that. I want them to reward and incentivize districts and district leaders and union leaders who are trying to address this human capital issue in new and ways, whether it's value-added pay for performance, whether it's strategic compensation. I think that there needs to be some kind of political support and leverage used not only at the federal but state level for those of us who are willing to go out and take the risk. But that, I believe that if we just focused on those things, I actually believe, like Ron Edmonds said 30 years ago, we already know everything we need to know about how to educate children well. What we need now is the political will of the adults to do it. I'm really sort of tired of us experimenting. I don't know if it's about being too loose with change, but let's stick with what we know works. And that's what I think I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see the federal government reward those of us who are going to stay the course and take risks when risks are necessary. But we truly need help with our unions, our union leaders who want to be innovative, who want to be courageous, have trouble because they'll lose their membership. So they need some cover also. But I do think that the stars are aligned, and what we now need is the political will of the adults.
Let me open it up. Please come to the mics and ask questions. We've got the diverse perspective here of state, district, research. Bob, let me ask you, well, somebody come to the mic. All right, I'm going to cede.
As Bill was talking, I was thinking about Debbie Meyer and the Coalition of Essential Schools, and was an early decentralization, and she did the whole personalized thing. And they created those reforms, and Ron Edmonds didn't have to deal with high-stakes testing either back then, but they did all that without data systems and testing and so forth. And their kids were very successful at college, and we're finding that in some of the KIPP schools, their scores are going up, but they're washing out in college. So to what extent, how do we think about data and data driving the system, and what kinds of data isn't going to just make things narrow instruction?
Well, I do think the data is important. And it should drive the decisions that are being made in a school district at every level, not only the school district level. I disagree. The testing, we've had testing around for as long as I can remember. We were using testing to sort folks when I was in high school. You know, the difference is that testing now, we're looking at everybody, and I'm happy that it's about all means all. And I don't want us to move away. I want to use the testing as a way to prescribe what needs to be done at every level of the organization. But I'm always surprised when people say, oh, this high-stakes testing. We had high-stakes testing. We didn't call it that, but it was around 40 years ago. And what I think is happening now is we're using that data to decide what instructional programs need to be in place, what professional development needs to be in place for teachers. And for teachers, they need to use it to guide what happens in that classroom, how they prescribe the strategies that they're going to use to increase achievement. So I think data we have lots of it now. What I'm finding in Philadelphia is we have so much of it, people don't know what to do with it. We're trying to now teach them what to do with it.
One kind of data we don't have enough of is actually very responsive to the examples you just offered, which is that we really, what we ought to care most about, particularly given all of our rhetoric about college and career readiness, is what actually happens to kids once they leave high school. How well, schools report how many kids go off to college. We know that only 52% of people who start college in the 18 or 19-year-old age range actually finish. But if we're actually going to know whether or not it's the KIPP schools versus the Debbie Meyer schools versus some other kinds of schools that actually have effects on kids, we need to be able to follow them post-high school. And that's one argument for that piece of the data requirement in Race to the Top, that states actually build longitudinal systems that enable us to follow kids, get that kind of feedback built back into the system.
The question was, how do you think about data? First of all, most of us have already realized we want to stop using, data-driven, as if there's any, 1 and 1 equals 2, as opposed to data-informed. And we're an industry that is not used to analysis. We're just not used to analysis. So the first issue is we're finally getting to the point where we can have data at all, whether it's human capital in the adult system, or a comprehensive student information system, or a good accounting system in terms of where's your time and your budgets and whatever. You need all of that, including very good tracking systems around the transitions, whether it's from kindergarten to first grade, or middle school to high school, or high school to college. All of that can be put on the table and mean nothing if you don't know how to interact with it and use it as a point of inquiry first, before you start racing to, we've kind of all of a sudden got data and it's instantly accountable. I'm all for accountability, but for an industry that never had it and never was held to it and kind of really kind of resorted back to what I know. We've got a lot of work to do to get all the indicators on the table and then how to use them. And I can tell you, I'm a big believer in some of the survey data. I want to know whether my kids feel like somebody in the school knows them, whether there's some support system as perceived by a parent or a teacher or whoever. And it's not to turn right around and say, fix it. It's to simply put in front of the people who have to make the decision at the work tables, this is the environment you've created or that you're working in. What does it mean for you to get from here to the next level of whatever the targets are? And therefore, I'm a big believer in data, but I'm a real believer that we have not yet really institutionalized good behavior of how to use it in the analytical sense.
Bill wanted to say something, and since he's a researcher and data is kind of his thing.
I wanted to say something along the lines of what Peter has just said and give a slightly different meaning to the idea of data. I want to do it. I've visited executive training programs all across the world. I've seen the ones at General Electric and IBM, which are particularly famous. I've seen the management development programs at virtually every major university in this country. And I want to say that the single best leadership training program of any kind I have ever seen anywhere is the Leadership Academy run by the New York City schools. And the reason is that what they do there is they get about 1,400 applicants now, imagine that, for 65 positions each year. And the people who go through this 15-month full-time training program begin with a summer boot camp during which they have to solve about 7 very complicated case studies. And in each case, they have been parachuted into a school as a new principal. And they are confronted by a staff, and they have descriptions of the staff. And they're confronted by the following data, and they have reams of data about the students, all of which are real, and about the situation, and it's a disastrous situation. And the question is, how are you as the leader going to put together and implement, drawing upon a team of people you've just inherited, probably half of whom think they, rather than you, should have gotten the job, and the other half of whom probably hate you for other reasons, and how are you going to make this work? And I visited that Leadership Academy maybe 4 or 5 times for 2 or 3 days each time, and I went out and interviewed people who were students in it as well as people who were principals who had graduated from it. And that intense practice, borrowing, I would say, from the case study format used in business schools, but entirely dealing with very realistic situations for how do you come up with an instructional plan that will help these children in these circumstances with these teachers. Every single participant said that was the best thing to prepare me to be a successful principal.
Because I'm a deadline girl, we're going to end on time. There was one gent with a question, and then we'll see who's relevant here.
Just a quick question about your TSL and how much it affected remediation. Did you do was your study at the elementary level or at the high school level, and did you correlate how well the kids were college prepared as they left high school in relationship to class size?
It covered schools from K through 12, 442 schools drawn from 8 school districts, all of which were attempting to or had decentralized, from New York to Chicago to St. Paul and San Francisco and Seattle and Houston. Our chief measure of performance was scores on standardized tests in mathematics. We did not look at the transition after high school to whatever was next.
Fill out your evaluation forms. We're going to thank the panel, and Chris DeVita is going to come up and say goodbye, I guess. That's the secret message I got. So thank our panel.
I'm going to do just what Ginny said I should do, which is what I always do when Ginny tells me to do anything, which is I'm going to ask you to thank this panel and every other panel that has been with us over the last couple of days. And I want, on behalf of our board and staff at the foundation, I want to do 2 more thank yous. I want to actually thank the Wallace Foundation staff who have been working on this conference for, I don't know, feels like, or they tell me it feels like, at least 17 years, even before we knew we were going to do it. And so I wanted to thank the staff who have done a really fabulous job. And most importantly, I want to thank you, because without you, these last 2 days, and quite frankly, these last 10 years would not have been possible. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking risks. Thank you for being willing to share what you're learning. Thank you for teaching us. And let's together take the next steps in this moment of time we have before us. Safe travels. Have a nice weekend. You clearly have earned it, so get in some sleep.